opportunity to talk to you today about energy and nuclear energy in particular. There are 64 sites in the United States with nuclear power plants, 104 plants in total across this country. The polling that has been done in recent years shows that somewhere between 60 and 65% of Americans support nuclear energy today. That's about double what it was 30 years ago. But most importantly, within 10 miles of those 64 nuclear plant sites, not including the nuclear workers themselves, the support averages 80% in support of nuclear energy. It's because those people who live near those plants know that they are clean and are not producing air pollution. They know they are safe and that there are no accidents harming them. They know they are getting their electricity for a reasonable cost because they can read their bills every month. And they know that those plants represent a giant wealth-creating machine in their community that is employing hundreds of people, more people than any other baseload electricity producer, at high wages, people who are good for that community and make a contribution to it. The 4 nuclear plants in Texas are producing already 72% of your clean energy, your non-carbon energy. You get 87% of your electricity from fossil fuels in this state and 10% from nuclear. The folks who are going to follow me here are against both fossil fuels and nuclear. In other words, against 97.2% of Texas energy supply. Personally, I don't think that's a very credible position in today's world. We've got to rely on the technologies that we already know about. Now, I am in favor of reducing our dependence on fossil fuels. 87% is a little high. It's not as diversified as I'm sure many people in the utilities here would like it to be. What are the alternatives for baseload power? Well, on a world basis, those alternatives are fossil fuels, mainly coal and gas, which you have plenty of here, hydroelectric energy, and nuclear power. Texas doesn't have the option of building large hydroelectric facilities because you don't have the resource. So really the choice going forward for baseload power plants is fossil fuels and nuclear power. It would be good for Texas if you balanced those a little better than they are now by building new nuclear. There is a renewed interest in nuclear that is spurred by a number of factors. One is the climate change issue and the desire to reduce carbon emissions, and all of the utilities are basically on notice that carbon may end up costing a lot of money in the future. And so there's a big risk to keep building fossil fuel plants. Besides which they do, even though the pollution control is much better today than it was in the past, they still do produce a lot of emissions compared to, say, nuclear or hydro. The other factor is energy security. Nuclear energy is domestically produced energy, whereas much of our energy in many of our countries around the world has to be imported, often from fairly unstable parts of the world. And the third issue is cost. Now, you're going to be told today that you should be scared of nuclear because it's going to cause the rates to skyrocket, and all because of the cost. This has not been demonstrated anywhere else on Earth. If you look, for example, at Europe, the examples of Germany, Spain, and Denmark are always put forward by the anti-nuclear movement as green examples that we should follow. And yes, they are leaders in wind and solar, but they are also leaders in high-cost electricity, because wind and solar are extremely expensive compared to the conventional energy resources. It's okay to have a little bit of it in the mix, but once you start ramping up solar and wind to a considerable percentage of your power, for example, I'm told here in Texas, the solar panel plants that are being built are in the neighborhood of 25 to 35 cents a kilowatt hour. You get above a couple of percent of your electricity supply with solar, and your rates start doubling. And this is the experience in Germany and Denmark and in Spain. If you want to look at actual models that are working, that are both reducing fossil fuel consumption and keeping rates low, look to Sweden and Switzerland and France, where various combinations of nuclear energy and hydroelectric energy, depending on the resources that they have, result in an economy that is run largely by non-fossil energy for electricity production, while at the same time keeping a reasonable price of electricity in those countries. Nuclear energy is one of the safest technologies that has ever been invented by human beings. That is why I was happy over 3 years ago to accept the position of co-chair of the Clean and Safe Energy Coalition. We are given all kinds of scare stories about how the nuclear plants are going to cause a problem. There hasn't been a single person injured by a nuclear plant in the Western world or Asia since nuclear energy started. It was only in the Soviet Union during the Cold War they took a shortcut and built shoddy plants with no containment structures and had an accident that caused death to, as the World Health Organization announced, 56 people died as a result of the Chernobyl accident. Now that's not acceptable, but 78 people just died in northern Russia in a hydroelectric dam accident the other day. That doesn't cause people to call for an end to all the hydroelectric power in the world, which is about equivalent to the amount of nuclear power, about 15% each worldwide. In other words, 30% of our electric energy worldwide is already non-carbon in hydroelectric and nuclear. The effort on the part of people who are trying to make a better balance in our energy mix is to increase those and to decrease the amount of our dependence on fossil fuels. In Texas, your main option is to do that with nuclear power, which is going to provide reasonable cost baseload. If for political reasons, and because you want it to be green, you would like to have more wind and solar energy, that's okay as long as you don't take it up to too high a percentage. Because not only does it cost more than conventional power, but it is inherently intermittent. The wind stops blowing for 3 or 4 days at a time. The sun never shines at night and doesn't work when it's cloudy. You simply cannot run factories and hospitals and schools and businesses or even your own homes on an energy technology system that disappears for 3 or 4 days at a time. The distinction between baseload power and intermittent power is one of the most important in the whole conversation about electricity for the future. So the anti-nuclear movement, which I was in at one time, even though I was educated in science, because we were so emotional back then about the threat of all-out nuclear war, it was the height of the Vietnam War, it was a very scary time to be a young person back in the late 60s, early 70s. We all got sucked in to thinking that everything nuclear was evil. We failed to make the distinction between the beneficial uses of nuclear technology and the destructive uses. In the case of nuclear technology, producing electricity with nuclear energy is on the good side, and producing nuclear weapons is on the bad side. That is why it is so promising that today 50% of the nuclear energy being produced in the United States is using uranium from dismantled Russian warheads. And this is the general trend that is going on everywhere. All the doom and gloom you hear about nuclear energy does not exist. It is a basically made-up story. So I hope at the end of this session you'll have learned some more about this subject. It's obviously a very complex one, but the bottom line is we need to use the technologies we know where we have reasonable figures for the price, and nuclear energy is really the main technology that we can use to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. We'll always be using fossil fuels in this state, in this country, of course, but nuclear has to be part of the future mix of energy for the country and, for that matter, for the world. Thank you very much.